Welcome back one last time to Halloween in July 2022, where we play some spooky games in our summer of constant terror to hide from the real horrors outside, like the sun. As you know, we're running an extra special promotion on the Patreon right now, where all new pledges will get their name embroidered onto my special patron apron for all the cooking segments, and to take advantage of how I've slashed yearly rates as low as they'll go, anyone who pledges yearly gets a sweet iron-on Charlatan Wonder patch. Or, if you pledge yearly at the $5 tier or higher, you can get the patch and your very own patron apron made by yours truly. By the way, I'm making all of these myself because screw all those crappy storefronts that charge exorbitant fees to make the most mediocre products. If I'm gonna make a mediocre product, I'm gonna do it myself. But these are pretty cool, by the way. You should totally pledge for them. So to wrap up our spooktacular summer, we're going to cover the sequel to Metro 2033, Metro Last Light. Last Light can be summarized as, what if we took everything from Metro 2033 and made it even more hardcore? Also, let's throw in some cheesy jiggle physics because it's the early 2010s and we're really beefing up our engine. Last Light takes place shortly after the events of Metro 2033, where the bad ending is a canonical one, so we did some pretty serious vibe checking on the mutants above the surface. But hey, Artyom is a ranger now, and the rangers have a cool new base of operations in Silo D6 that's full of weapons, food, shelters, and God knows what else is down there. So they have everything they need and then some. That's a bit of a sticking point though. Everyone wants what the Rangers now have, and while the Rangers are open to the idea of distributing the supplies to the people of the underground, the fascists are gonna fascist, and the communist faction known as the Red Line wants to collectivize the whole thing for themselves. But they're totally open to peaceful talks right now. Just don't look at what everyone's armies are doing right outside of the metro. Oh yeah, and it turns out that one of the Dark Ones might have survived you nuking them, so you should probably go check that out. Metro Last Light is specifically called Metro Last Light and not Metro 2034 like the sequel to the namesake novel because Glukhovsky thought it wasn't a very good fit for a video game adaptation, so he helped the team at 4A Games come up with new material to base the sequel on Metro 2033 the game on. They made so much new material that Glukhovsky ended up using it, plus all the extra stuff he wrote, to make a whole new third novel, Metro 2035, which you might have noticed hidden in nooks and crannies of Metro Redux. We'll talk more about the story of Metro Last Light later on though, so for now we'll just leave it at that. Before we get into the game itself, we should talk about a couple things that give it some context and also make it just really impressive that Last Light is as great as it is. First off, there was the pre-order controversy. Metro 2033 is known for its hardcoreness and how you can play the game without even a HUD for maximum challenge and immersion. At the time, it was a dark horse of the hardcore shooter genre in a sea of Call of Duty clones, back when DayZ was still a mod for Arma 2 and an expansion that required a separate launcher. With that in mind, Metro Last Light was marketed as having a special pre-order bonus where if you bought the game in advance, not only would you get a smattering of extra military-grade bullets at the beginning, which for the uninitiated are not only your in-game currency, which is very hard to come by, but also an I win button in combat if you choose to load your gun with them. But also, you get a high-end automatic rifle right from the get-go. But wait, there's more! You also get access to the hardcore difficulty as a pre-order bonus. That's right. Some clown in upper management thought it was a good idea to pre-order gate a whole difficulty setting and also what the Metro games were known for. Understandably, people were not happy about this, especially when the band-aid fix to this was, oh, it's okay if you don't pre-order or you can't. You can just buy hardcore mode as a DLC. Excuse me, what? Yeah, it was a dark time in the underground, and this was also around the time where a lot of game producers were pushing pre-order bonuses as hard as they can go. Like, this was the fever pitch, and it kind of backed off for a while, while publishers found a new way to milk the studios for money. And now contrast this with the working conditions at 4A Studio during the development of Last Light. According to an article written by former THQ president Jason Rubin, who was brought on to try and fix things at THQ a little too late, things at 4A were nuts. Supposedly, they had to smuggle in all the gear they needed like PCs and dev kits because if they tried to legitimately ship the dev kits and stuff in, they would get stolen by corrupt customs officials. Thanks to the same corruption issues, they couldn't send the team proper chairs to sit at, and 4A was forced to work on old wedding chairs, and the power would straight up go out for hours at a time. And at some point, the team just had to go and get like a construction site generator to keep the power on as it was winding up towards release because just it was too unreliable otherwise. Like they were just sitting there in like their winter clothes, desperately trying to get the game finished. And when you think about all of this, it's just amazing that Last Light even got out the door, let alone in such a state that it was, that it's a damn good game. And we should really take the time to appreciate what we have here. Lucky for us, what we're playing here is Metro Last Light Redux, which came out at the same time of Metro Redux because 4A just wanted to make the versions of the game they wanted to make. Among a bunch of other nice little fixes that the team at 4A wanted to do now that things were a little more better back home, relatively speaking, was that now hardcore mode is openly available for everyone. Just as before, you can only get the Redux version now as it's just the better version of the original game without any of that funny business 4A had to do under a dying THQ. So I'm doing my first playthrough on Ranger Hardcore because I was a morphine-powered murder machine on higher difficulties in the last game, and I think I'm ready for the biggest challenge right out the gate. Let me tell you right off the bat, Metro Last Light is a lot more intense than Metro 2033. This was brutal. I think I can count on one hand how many rooms or areas in the whole playthrough weren't so much as easy as they were just not an absolute struggle, requiring a ton of resets and trying everything I could think of only to just squeak by. And I'll come clean and say that this was a complete mistake. Maybe not so much for the difficulty itself, but in how you actually need the UI on your first playthrough, because this is an early 2010s video game, meaning, of course, there are QuickTime events requiring you to mash buttons. I ended up having to refer to a guide on a few occasions because I kept dying in a few places, and eventually when I cave in thinking, oh, maybe I missed something, it was always, oh, this is a QuickTime event. That's why I keep dying no matter how many one of these dudes I shoot. Or, oh, I would have been given a context-sensitive prompt here that would have made it obvious as to what I was supposed to do in this room. I'll admit I had a whole lot of trouble figuring out exactly where I needed to be to pick things up, or if I needed to press a button or hold a button to do a certain action. And it's also quite a bit of a challenge to switch your throwables when you don't have the context menu and you don't know what to do immediately. Like, you can do it, you just have to listen very, very closely for audio cues to know what throwable or landmine you switch to. And if you don't already know which way to shift your mouse to select the right thing, you can have a very bad time in the middle of combat. And speaking of that, that is very, very hard. Almost impossible to do in the middle of combat when you've got to listen closely to something and there's a giant screaming monster chasing you down. I died a lot to accidentally throwing the wrong item. So obviously the hard thing about hardcore is that you've got no way of knowing exactly for certain how much ammunition you have unless you are so strapped for bullets that you can't even fill a magazine, which in that case you're going to have a pretty solid idea of how many bullets you've got left. Knowing exactly how many bullets you've got outside of seeing your counts when you're at the store becomes a problem later on when you realize that because of difficulty modifiers, you don't get as much ammo as you see on the ground when you pick it up. The best example of this being the shotgun shells, which it looks like you're gonna get 5 when you pick it up, but in reality, you only get 2 or 3 because you're playing on the hardest difficulty. A potential solution to this, which admittedly wasn't even a thing when Metro Last Light came out, would be to do what they did in Outlast 2, where you have a visible player model as you're playing, and you can just straight up look down and see what you have. Like, say, you look down and on one hip, you can see how many magazines of rifle ammo you have, or you've got a bandolier over your chest that lets you clearly see how many shotgun shells you've got. While a lot of things in Outlast 2 weren't quite as good as the first game, the one thing it did really, really well was having no UI menus at all and having everything visual, and I would have loved to have been able to look down at my player model like I did in Outlast 2. Maybe they'll do that in a later game though. It's like, for now, it's just something you gotta live with. And again, don't immediately go into hardcore survival. You need to know your prompts before you can play the game. So as you might expect in a survival shooter set in a post-apocalyptic world, ammo is hard to find, and healing items are even harder to find. Dead guys aren't guaranteed to have more ammo than you expended to kill them on them, or even have the ammo you're looking for. And obviously monsters and the like aren't gonna have extra bullets or med kits on them. You're gonna wanna go through each area with a fine-tooth comb and open every locker, emergency box, and dead body you find laying around. I think outside of a few moments that were usually around having to stop at a store, I think I was hardly ever at full stock on any of my ammo at any point in the game. And if you think that was bad, the health kits are even worse. Downed enemies very rarely have health kits on them because, you were shooting at them and they had them right there. And while I don't think enemies actually heal themselves in game, that's kind of my headcanon on why health kits just are so rarely on downed enemies. You're gonna very rarely have a full box of little needle thingies, and very often when you do, you're most likely gonna have to burn 2 or even 3 of them to get yourself back up to full HP, and you'll consider yourself lucky that you were able to do that in in the first place because there are large stretches of Metro Last Light when you're playing on Survival Hardcore, where if you play poorly, you're gonna have a lot of strawberry jam on your screen, and there's nothing you're gonna be able to do about it for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes at a time. By the way, you get put into critical range in like 2 shots or a single blow from one of the mutants. Don't suck at video games if you're gonna play Metro Last Light. So what's gonna be standing before you and getting the MacGuffin of the plot? Well, we know enough from the last game that the radiation and God knows what else is in the air right now caused the local wildlife to get a little crazy. These guys are still around, and there's also the Watchmen, which seem to be more aggressive than they were in Metro 2033, plus new additions such as the Shrimp Boys and the Screamers. Metro Last Light also has some boss monsters in it now, which are usually at least 5 tries if you're going in blind and you need to learn how to beat them. But one of them's pretty obvious and I got it on the first go round. And of course, we're still shooting dudes. It's mostly communists from the Red Line who are the de facto bad guys in this game, but you'll also face off against the fascists and some random bandits too. Enemies are smart in Last Light, and corner camping usually doesn't work. But hey, at least you can try sneaking in some cases to conserve ammo. More on sneaking later. Enemies go down in a few well-placed shots, but so do you. However, the bad guys have an advantage, which is that while you, a human, might have issues with things such as visibility or having a ton of crap in your line of sight that makes it hard to identify targets, the enemies do not have that problem, and so long as they have a theoretical line of sight to you, they can hit you. This makes some segments particularly frustrating, but eventually you'll get enough tools to mitigate this issue or just get really good at indiscriminate violence. Now how about some spookies to close off the spooktacular summer? Metro Last Light has a healthy helping of the spookies, owing to, you know, the whole Metro system being a post-apocalyptic hellscape. Artyom's gonna be out on his own for a lot of the game, and there's gonna be a lot of nasty stuff coming after him in poorly lit areas. Then, there's also the dead areas. Dead areas are places where everything is dead but not quite aware of the fact that they're supposed to be dead, so they leave these sort of after images. Stuff like shadows of humans who are just minding their own business right before presumably suffering horrific deaths, that sort of thing. Sometimes you're just in a room with a bunch of ominous spooky shadows. Sometimes you're forced into full-on hallucinations as you re-experience the final moments of people living in Moscow just before everything above the surface got aggressively sterilized. There's a level where you're going to go through an entire city of this stuff where you can see how everything was just before the big booms, and they've got this nice mix of like melancholy and unnerving to them. When you aren't tripping out on subway fumes though, the Metro in general is still a pretty spooky place. Nothing is properly lit. Everything looks like it's one dude leaning on it a little too hard in the wrong place away from collapsing on you. Oh yeah, and there are communists and fascists out to kill you at all times. At times, the Metro feels a little blah on the color palette and leaning dangerously close into the trope of the early 2010s linear shooter game, which, wait a minute, this is an early 2010s linear shooter game. Whatever. If all the freaky stuff in the Metro wasn't bad enough, you spend even more time above ground in Metro Last Light compared to 2033, and the above ground is just as scary as before, but now there's even more stuff up there, and there's even more things you have to do to return to relative safety in the underground. Couple this with the anxiety of having all your filters getting used up as you scramble to look for the things you need above ground to advance, and the even slower parts of going above ground get really tense. I make no exaggeration when I say it's very common to just straight up run out of filters. Did I mention that if an enemy scores a headshot on you, they can straight up break your mask, making whatever filters you have stockpiled useless and setting a guaranteed timer on your death unless you pull off some MLG crap? But speaking of getting shot in the face and then suffocating before you can even get to safety, let's talk about how you never have the upper hand in Last Light. Sometimes you might have the element of surprise, but if you do, that means you're up against a force so well dug in that you're just gonna barely squeak by even with all the advantages you're given. To start with never having the upper hand, we've got the existential horror of being broke all the time. Military-grade rifle rounds are still the currency everyone in the Metro uses, and now they're even more rare, as you probably shot quite a few of them in the last game. Problem is, you're gonna need to shoot them even more in Last Light. There's plenty of times where you'll just straight up run out of normal ammo and need to pop in the good stuff to deal with something that'll deal with you in the next 3 seconds if you aren't fast. This means that you can pretty much kiss buying new guns goodbye. Count yourself lucky if you can even afford a gun mod on top of like topping off one kind of ammo. And it's often going to come down to which ammo do you want to buy a little more of before you head out to the next area. And it would also seem that almost none of the vendors have filters anymore, or when they do have them, you can't afford them. Since you're out in the open air quite a bit, you're going to burn through those filters, and they aren't exactly super common above ground. I straight up almost had to restart my playthrough early on because I was sloppy with my filters in the early game and like swapped too fast or too soon and kept running out of air at a certain segment where I had to wait wait for a door to open. Lucky for me, after doing a little desperate backtracking, I found a single filter, which let me just barely make it into the cutscene where I'm brought back inside of the metro. I said it before and I'll say it again. Having the constant ticking clock on you while you're trying to figure something out or figure out how to get to somewhere where you're not exactly sure where the path is safe adds a ton of tension to the surface segments and even other parts of the game where something happens and suddenly the air underground is no longer safe to breathe. You gotta really keep an eye on Artyom's watch and make sure you're swapping out those filters as close to the 0-second mark as possible if you've got any hope of making it from one end of an above ground segment to another. One last thing that can be pretty spooky because of the difficulty in game, and it's honestly more of a gameplay thing, but stealth is back in Metro, and stealth in Metro Last Light is extremely hard. Like, there are some of the toughest stealth segments I've played in a very long time if you want to play stealthy, and the AI is not only competent, but also have themselves arranged in a way to where there are very few blind spots in their patrols. Even if you aren't planning on being a sneaky stealth boy, it is very important to get yourself in the right position before you go loud in certain fights, because if you just charge in, you'll most likely find yourself on the wrong end of a shooting range. And if the constant tension from the environment, the lack of air, and just how brutal the game can be wasn't enough, there's all the freaky monsters coming after you. We've got all the original baddies from the first game, plus a whole new slew of mutated creatures, which all move and act in a certain way that make you go, oh shit, whenever they come at you. It really helps Last Light's case in the spooky factor that the mutants are not only fast, but also hard-hitting and hard to hit themselves. It's one thing to have a big, freaky mutant or some kind of zombie thing, but a lot of games make them slow and bank on you just running away from them all the time so that you won't look at them too much. But here the spooky factor is kept high because they are fast too and you have to confront them. Last Light goes hard with monsters moving so fast it's hard to get a real good look at them, but they're also an actual threat, which keeps things freaky because sometimes you'll just go down. Like, before you even realize you are being swarmed, they will get you. And now time for one last cooking segment to top off the spooktacular summer, bones and ghouls. We're gonna make us some pizza. I've actually tried my hand at filming a pizza cooking segment 2 times before this, and they just didn't quite come out right. After a lot of practice, which some of y'all might have seen on my YouTube stories, I think that after I just accept that I'm prone to goofing on camera, I think this time's a winner. I find this all to be a little ironic personally because I used to work at a pizza joint for a couple of years while going to school. First order of business is the dough. We're just gonna use this recipe from Food Network by Bobby Flay because let's not reinvent the wheel here, with the only changing being that we're going to multiply it by a factor of 1.5 since these pizza pans are 16 inches and therefore need more dough to spread around. It's still a pretty simple and straightforward process though. 6 cups of bread flour, a little over 2 cups of warm water, adding more as you need, salt, sugar, and a teaspoon and a half of yeast. Mix it all together and then use a sifter to evenly spread flour over your work surface before plopping your dough onto it and kneading. I'd also suggest thoroughly coating your hands in flour too while you're kneading and having that sifter at the ready to add more as you need because the dough will absorb the stuff immediately there, and we can't really form this into a dough if it gets stuck to our counter. As for the act of kneading the dough itself, I find the best practical advice is not to overthink it. People will talk your ear off about gluten development and all that good stuff, but I just like to press it out, fold it in on itself, and repeat until the surface of the dough is smooth. You'll know when it's good to go when you can give it a little pokety poke and it springs back a bit. Once that's happening, gently roll it out into a log, cut that log in half, and then form those 2 pieces into balls and put them both into lightly oiled containers. I like to just use a brush and lightly spread the oil so I'm not overdoing it. And then once the dough's in, I also lightly brush the top of the dough balls with oil too so we got even coverage. Cover up those containers with plastic or a wet cloth and then don't touch them for at least an hour. This is going by the recipe, by the way. I personally like to let them go in the fridge overnight before punching down and flipping and letting go for a couple more hours. Speaking of which, when that hour passes, pull off the wrap, lightly punch the dough down, give them a flip, and then let them raise for another 10 minutes before they're good to go. While you're waiting for all that dough to rise, it would be a very good idea to prep all your toppings. Grate your mozzarella because it is always better to have ungrated cheese in a block because there's stabilizers and crap in pre-grated cheese. And if you've got them, maybe cut your veggies and take your time to cook up sausage or any other meat items that you'd like to put on the pizza. Making sure to let sausage or any other greasy meats drain really well before it's time to top them on the pizza because we want to keep the excess grease to a minimum. Once everything's all prepped, set it aside, and when the time comes, you'll have an easy to use make station ready to go. Okay, Dough's ready. Reapply flour to your work surface if you clean it off, and get ready to make that orb of dough into a flat crust. We're gonna start with a technique I learned back in my Domino's days, where while I was a driver, it was one of those stores where we actually had some serious business, so drivers had to hop on the make line if we wanted our orders to come out on time. What we're gonna do here is called slapping the dough. Lay one hand over the other and then quickly, repeatedly press it down into a thick disc, leaving a little bit on the edge unpressed, which is gonna become our crust. Then just like slightly pull your hand apart in a circular motion as you slap until you start getting a more crust-like shape. You can keep doing this all the way until your pizza crust is ready to go, but if you wanna get fancy, you can start tossing. The main advice I'd have here is just tuck the points of your fingers in so you don't accidentally puncture the dough, and then if you do, we can fix that later anyway. The only tossy-esque thing, toss-like, I don't know the word, that I'd suggest doing though, is once you've got the dough in roughly the shape you want it for the pizza, I suggest doing this thing where you pass it back and forth one hand to the other because you want to get any excess flour or like cornmeal, whatever you're using. You want to get as much of that off the dough as possible before you cook it because nobody likes a floury tasting pizza crust. Now let's get it into position. Drape your pizza crust over the pan. Do not push and spread. Do not. No. Drape. We want to carefully lift the edges of our dough over the edges of the pan and never push down because that'll mess up the dough and make it very hard to like get off the pan when it's done cooking. By the way, if you got any holes, now's the time to just take a bit of excess dough off the edge of your crust, spread it as thin as you can, and then lightly drape it over the holes. No one's gonna notice. Again, do not press down on your dough. Now that the crust is ready, go on and sauce it. We want no more than one heaping ladle full of pizza sauce here, otherwise the crust is gonna be like soggy and stuff. And I've tried having extra saucy pizza before and it just never works out well. Just if you want more sauce, like add it at the end, like dip your pizza. Just keep gently spreading it out with your ladle and eventually the sauce you have will cover the whole pie. Next comes the cheese and finally any other toppings you'd like, such as the pepperoni and sausage I've prepped here. Crank El Horno to 450 heat units of freedom because we need it hot. Okay, pizza time. Once you're damn sure that your oven is all the way heated, toss in one pizza at a time and keep it in there for about 10 to 15 minutes. And it's gonna be a specific time. For me, that time is about 12 and a half to 13 minutes, but every oven is a little different, so it might be a matter of trial and error for you. Also, we do only one pizza at a time here because otherwise they're not gonna heat evenly and one's gonna end up either over or undercooked. Take out the pies the very second the timer goes off and chuck the next one in. First out here is the cheese, which is pretty easy. If you'd like, dab off the extra oil here and then cut it up. To get 8 slices, go down the middle, then perpendicular to your first cut, and then finally 2 more cuts in the spaces between those first 2 cuts. And if you want wide slices, go once down the middle and then make a big X between the next 2 slices for 6. Personally, I'm pretty happy with the cheese. It turned out nice. Now for the pepperoni and sausage, which is a little trickier to handle out of the oven since we got all those meats and extra grease on them. But once that's taken care of, are you serious right now? Welcome back to Metro Last Light. There is a story here. I'm just gonna say screw it and put the spoiler warning here because some of the stuff we talk about is also spoilers for the last game or involves talking about plot twists. So when we last left off with Artyom in the Metro, he did the bad ending where he annihilated all the Dark Ones despite them actually being pretty cool. Or so we thought. Apparently, there is one left and we gotta go find it while all the other Rangers handle some peace talks over who gets what from the bunker D6. We also get some interesting flashbacks early in the game where a Dark One saves a young Artyom from some mutants on the surface, and I'm gonna call it as I see it. As far as the game-to-game continuity goes, this is a blatant retcon, because there's absolutely no indication in the last game that Artyom had any interactions with the Dark Ones previously, positive or otherwise, in Metro 2033. Having knowledge like that would have heavily affected how the story progressed in the last game, and also would have made getting the good ending a lot more straightforward since we didn't know that the Dark Ones were nice from the get-go. You know, whatever. So here we are as our Ranger selves now, going on to go get the Dark One. Oh no, the fascists are here and they're actually doing fascist stuff this time around. Luckily, this nice guy named Pavel is captured with us and we work together to get out of the fascist base and to the relative freedom of the Red Line. Surely Pavel won't betray us, and he's an unflinching agent of the Red Line that's plotting the downfall of the Rangers. What a surprise! So as it turns out, the communist faction of the Red Line have been pretty busy. They've gotten one of the Rangers on their side and acting as a spy in Station D6, who has been able to steal some motherfucking weaponized Ebola virus from the depths of D6 so that the communists can use it to aggressively spread free healthcare along the unaligned metro stations and take over everything. So now, on top of finding the last Dark One, who has been kidnapped by randos wanting to move it around the metro like some sort of circus animal, we've got to find a way to warn the other Rangers that the peace talks are a sham and mostly meant to be stalling for the Red Line to spread the virus, and then conveniently show up with their flamethrower squad to torch all the infected stations. Something I noticed throughout the entire plot is that despite the author of the books helping out, the characters in Last Light are extremely unmemorable compared to the events of the plot itself, and frankly, aside from Pavel, who I only remember his name because I got a Steam trading card of him, I can't remember anyone's name, and even had to go back and check if I accidentally misnamed another character in the previous Metro video. I didn't. It's just that all the Spartans are so uninteresting that it's hard to tell them apart. I kid you not, aside from telling you what each person does in Metro Last Light, like their actions, not even their job or affiliation, because the latter is just not much of a descriptor in Metro, I can't tell you anything about the main characters. I know that the books are a lot better and that 4A wasn't exactly having the coziest time making Last Light, but I literally could not tell you anything about the sniper daughter, aside from the fact that she's the daughter of one of the Rangers, she uses a sniper, and she seems to exist for Artyom to have a brief relationship with at the start of the third act. That's not to say the game is devoid of having any sort of characterization moments. If anything, there are nice little character moments that happen in between major plot beats, with minor characters like the fisherman taking a few last drags of his cigarette before tossing the box of explosives, or I gotta be honest, that's the only one that stuck with me. I understand Exodus is a lot better in this respect though. So eventually we find the last Dark One, and what a surprise, it's a child. But it also has the collective memories of its whole people, or however that works in Metro. And you know what? He's actually pretty nice to have around. I didn't want to make the comparison earlier in how Last Light came around right when BioShock Infinite came out, and how even though I cut my teeth on picking apart that game's story and characters, at least there was enough story and characterization to pick apart in BioShock Infinite. I bring this up here because Little Dark One is very similar to how Elizabeth is in BioShock Infinite, and how he stays out of the way during the combat, he talks, but not so much that he's annoying, and he brings us lots of useful stuff from time to time. And the comparisons stop there because we don't have an expansion pack where Little Dark One turns into like a total edgelord in another timeline. You know what? I hope this kid is doing well in the Metro continuity. He was the only person I liked in Metro Last Light. So we get the Dark One and bring him to Bunker D6 and reveal the truth. We use the psychic powers of the Dark One to go to the darkest, most twisted place we've ever gone in the Metro series, the mind of a Twitter user. There we reveal that the new leader of the Red Line has been plotting all this crap with the spooky guy that's in charge of spies or whatever, and the Red Line forces are about to invade D6 in literal moments. We get to the defensive position just in time to have the most cathartic unlimited ammo experience after all that struggling to make it from one station to the next with next to no ammo, and depending on your choices throughout the game, will either make the whole bunker go boom so that no one can have it, or the Little Dark One will awaken his family in hypersleep inside of the D6 bunker, and they'll save us all in the good ending. In summary, Metro Last Light is an intense shooter. It's a great experience if you want some of that post-apocalyptic Eastern European horror, but you also want something a good deal more structured than your typical Stalker game. Now that we've got Last Light Enhanced Edition, we also don't have any of the major hang-ups that came with the original Metro Last Light, and it's pretty cheap too, since it's been a while since the game dropped. Like, dang, the original game dropped like over a decade ago. I definitely say check this out, and it's really worth ending Halloween in July this year on, and overall, like, I had a great time with it, although I would suggest do not go straight for survival hardcore. There are things that you need to have the UI before like you really get into it. Try like normal survival mode first with UI and then get into it. And one last time, don't forget to head on over to patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where your pledge can get your name on the patron apron and even get your own iron-on patch for pledging yearly at any tier, or even a patron apron of your own for pledging yearly at the $5 tier or higher, which I have further incentivized by cutting the yearly rates as low as they'll go. I'm going to start fulfilling these in mid to late August because that's when I'm going to be able to start fulfilling them. I actually had to start ordering more like base components like the aprons and thread because you guys already completely pledged out my stock in the first week and a half of Halloween, July. thank you so much for that, by the way. It's really helping me out right now. And that's gonna do it for Halloween in July. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you right now. I'm exhausted and I'm at my limit, maybe even a little past it as I write this and start to record it. As some of you might know, I usually take my vacation in July by making one of these videos in advance every month leading up to July itself, but a lot of stuff happened this year. And here I am crunching in like the third week of July trying to get this out and the Chernobylite video too, so I can take some kind of break. I have had no breaks all year. I know part of it was frankly because I made some poor choices taking too many sponsorships in the beginning of the year in hopes that the extra cash would help me to focus on finding time to make the Halloween in July videos later on, but stuff kept on happening and I had to redo a lot of stuff and cancel a lot of previous video ideas and find replacements for them. And there was no way I could have known anything surrounding Stalker 2 was gonna happen when I decided on this theme last year. And frankly, if this has taught me anything, it's that one, I think I need to really rethink how I take sponsorships if I'm going to take them at all. And for another, no more themes because it's just too unpredictable sometimes with like set series that only have so many entries. The worst part of all this is that not only have those ad agencies not given me any more deals when I could really use them, but I'm frankly not proud of the majority of the videos I produced from the first half of this year because rather than be made because I wanted to make a video on the subject, they were made so that I'd have a video to put an ad on. I don't think I'm going to be taking traditional ad deals anymore, at least not without a whole lot of concessions, because between the deadlines and all the other constraints thrown at me, at least for me, there's just no way for me to make a good video like that. It's no surprise that my favorite video of this year so far was the Abermore video, which I had no constraints on and no reason to do whatsoever other than it exists because I wanted to make it, because I saw this thing as like, oh my god, this is terrible, I must make a video, it's hilarious. I've decided that after some massive burnout that's probably caused me to take even longer to finish these last videos, that I'm gonna take at least a month off, maybe more, to get myself back into the right headspace to make good videos that get traction, because at this point, anything I do is gonna piss off the algorithm. Streaming pissed off the algorithm, trying to make regular videos fast pisses off the algorithm, so if I'm gonna piss off the algorithm, I may as well do it in a way that makes a really good video that gets shared around. You'll most likely see more of me in late August or early September for a video on the Gloomwood Early Access, if that happens as planned. And I only say that because for me, at least, this has been the year of random complications throwing a wrench into everything. Then comes Indieween, which I've reformulated to make it easier to produce and more viewer friendly. And finally, God knows what at the end of this year. There's a ton of games I want to make videos on, but I'm gonna take my time with them, and that might take longer than what can be done inside of this year or on that sort of timetable. In the meantime, thank you all for watching. Please stay safe, stay indoors, wear your sunscreen when you gotta go out, and enjoy this cat video. Well, would you look at this? It's a box boy. You just chilling? You just, let me also, because one of these has my address on it. There we go. You just enjoying all the boxes we got for you? Because we went to the Sam's Club to get kitty litter for your kitty shitter. And now you're just in box heaven? Not even, you're just so blissful you're not even going to turn around? What if I turned you around? Do I have your attention now? Chonkulus? Can I pet? Ooh, I can pet! Oh, I can't pet. I have been denied pets. Oh dear, now I've got you in a mood. Oh yeah, that's definitely a mood. Alright, I'll leave you be. Time for us to have a vacation anyway.